Okay, it seems that we're live, so we're starting now. Um, so hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of our brainstorms. This month we have a new fail talk by our guest Professor Zita Martins. I'm Fabio Cruz, and I'm a PhD student in physics at Técnico, and I'll be just the person moderating this session today. These brainstorms are sessions organized by the Técnico's Student Club for mental health and inclusion, and their goal is really to be an open forum to discuss these issues of mental health and inclusion. So today we have a session that is organized in collaboration with FAIL, Inspiring Resilience, which is an international project that was born at MIT in 2018 with the general goal of destigmatizing failure. I'll be talking a bit about this project in a few minutes. So our goal today is that the session will be informative, but also interactive in some way. So today we will be saving our questions to the end. So at the end we will hold a Q&A period after Zita's talk. So I'd like to invite everyone to write your questions in Zoom's chat box, and you can do this during the talk or after the talk, and then we'll read them to our guests. Just before we start, I'd like to remind you once again that the session is being recorded and broadcasted live on our YouTube channel, where you can also see the previous brainstorms if you're interested. Okay, so like I said before, in today's brainstorms we have a failed talk by Zita Martins. And before we let Zita take it away, I'd like to first introduce this FAIL project. So, what is FAIL? FAIL was a project born to create a more understanding and a more accepting environment towards failure in companies, universities, and society in general. And this comes from the fact that in these environments we have a more and more competitive atmosphere nowadays. And so failure was created to sort of create this more accepting environment. So the main product of FAIL is or are events in which we have successful speakers, so people who we don't normally hear talking about failure, and they come and share their personal stories of failure, and tell us about the lessons that they have learned from those failures. So normally these are quite interesting talks, because the speakers open up about their vulnerabilities, and they expose a side that is more humane and that we're not used to see from these successful individuals. So today we'll have one of these talks by our guest. Unfortunately, this is something that we're pushing to make happen soon. We have not been able to organize an in-person FAIL event at Técnico. We're working on it. What we've done is we have organized in December the first FAIL talk in Portugal, and that one was also in Portuguese by Professor Arlindo Oliveira. And today we have our second FAIL talk. So very interesting, very interesting. I think start of the project in Portugal as well. So now our guest today will be Zita Martins, as I said. So Zita is an associate professor at Técnico, and is also co-director of the MIT Portugal program. And in her research in quite a nice and exotic field, astrobiology, she looks for these biosignatures in space missions, and investigates the potential contribution of organic compounds present in meteorites and comets to the origin of life on Earth. So today she will be taking us to the beginning of her career in this field as a researcher, and tell us about some of the unique challenges that she had to face as a PhD student. So Zita, thank you very much once again for accepting our invitation. And please, when you're ready, take it away.
Good afternoon, all. I'll be talking a little bit about the beginning of my career. I don't have slides because I want to focus on the message and on the events that actually happened to me. So I did my undergraduate in Técnico, 5 years undergraduate degree in chemistry. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was a very happy years, and I really enjoyed the chemistry degree. But I didn't want to do just pure chemistry for the rest of my life. I wanted to do something related to space, because that has been always my dream since I can remember, and I wanted to put the two things together. And the 5-year degree, undergraduate degree at that time, had experimental work on the last year. So you could stay either in Portugal or go abroad, or stay in a lab or go to industry. So do whatever the student wanted. And that was really, really nice. So when I was in the 4th year, I actually saw, I read the book, and then I saw the movie of Carl Sagan, Contact. And in that moment, I thought this is actually what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, because he put it together, chemistry, but to study the universe. And so it started my search to the place where I was going to do my undergraduate training. And I remember I wrote 5 emails to NASA, to the astrochemistry group. It wasn't the astrobiology, it was the astrochemistry group at NASA. And I wrote different emails, and all of them told me, just go to the Netherlands and work with this professor. She's from Austria, but she's working in the Netherlands, and her name is Pascale Edenfreund, and she'll be perfect for what you want to do. So I wrote her an email, and we're talking the beginning of this century. So emails and computers are not like we know it now, something completely different, nearly 20 years ago. And so I wrote an email. Professor Pascale Edenfreund accepted me in her group to do some undergraduate degree, some undergraduate training, 6 months. I went there. I was applying all the analytical chemistry techniques I learned, but this time to samples that were extraterrestrial, so to meteorite samples. I did some other projects, but that one was the one I really enjoyed. I really love to live in Leiden in the Netherlands. Beautiful city, cycling everywhere, really, really nice environment. So I thought, okay, I really enjoy this. This is really what I want to do. This is the path I want to continue to do. So I'm going to apply to do a PhD. So I'm going to apply for an FCT scholarship. And then a few months later, I did. I won, and I went back. And so I had 4 years of money to do my PhD in a research area that I love. And I was really happy and excited for the project, for the people I work, lovely people, for everything that I was doing. But I was in charge of a project that was challenging. It was something completely new, in the sense that we wanted to test a new theory, something that the community has been discussing for the past 40 years. So basically, we wanted to know if nucleobases that were being detected in different meteorites were actually part of the meteorite, or if they were just contamination. And this was important because we wanted to know if, in this case, these components of the genetic material were actually being formed outside of the Earth, and whether they had a contribution for the origin of life on Earth or not. So this was my project. And obviously, when you're testing something completely new with some new techniques and new methods, it's a challenge, as you can imagine. But I was very excited, and I thought, okay, let's do with this slowly and we'll eventually get there. So optimizing all the methods, for those of you that are chemists and those of you are not, it takes a long, long time. It took me nearly 3 years out of a PhD of 4 years. And I was noticing that all my colleagues in my group, in the astrobiology group, were publishing. So one of the things when you do a PhD in the Netherlands is that before you have your PhD defense, you need to publish at least 4 articles. So you're able to put it all together, write a thesis, and then submit and have a PhD defense. So without articles, you're not able to defend and have your PhD. And I was noticing during my PhD that all my colleagues were publishing easily. And I was the one that was really working really hard. But at the same time, I was not able to publish anything because what I was doing was something completely different. And obviously it would take time. So during the first year, more or less, of my PhD, I gave a talk. All this was in parallel and it will come together at some point. So I gave a talk in the first year of my project saying, I'm doing this. I still don't have big results, just preliminary results, but I'm working on this type of research. And on this international conference, there were some colleagues from NASA. At the end of my talk, they came to me and said, look, we really enjoy what you're doing and we want to collaborate with you. So please come to NASA Goddard in Washington, DC for a few months as invited scientists, and we'll get this thing working. And so at the end of my PhD, after optimizing all the methods, after what I hoped was having really small amounts of sample, but enough to do the analysis at NASA, I flew to the States. I didn't take the samples with me because I was afraid that I would be stopped in customs with samples that look like powder. As you can imagine, entering the US with white powder, it wouldn't look good on me. So I just mail it. I put it on the post. And so in parallel to flying to the States, my samples went there. And so I was at NASA for a couple of months. Also there, I had to learn new methods and new techniques to get my samples and everything. And when everything was optimized, I thought, okay, now is the time to actually run my samples and hopefully, fingers crossed, get some results. When I got there and to that point, we realized that the samples arrived by mail, by post to NASA, and we were happy because it was registered mail. But then we realized that inside of NASA, the secretary lost my samples. And so this was absolutely devastating because, as I told you, I was 3 years already into my PhD, no publications whatsoever. My samples were lost, so I had nothing to run. And this is not like I could synthesize again my samples because meteorites are extremely rare and precious samples. And so you can't simply say, oh, just give me some more. You basically have to write a full proposal to a museum, and then they give you a few milligrams, and you have to explain even then why you want that. And this takes a lot of time. And so at that point that we realized, I was still in the States, and I realized my samples were lost. The secretary lost it somehow. Till today, we still don't know how somebody lost my samples. And at the same time, I had submitted a manuscript, not directly involved with this project, but just a side project to try to get some articles published. And we had, as a group, astrobiology group in Leiden, we had a competitor, and our manuscript went to that competitor. So our manuscript was completely thrown away. And so all of this was in a same week, same couple of days. So I have to say that week wasn't easy for me at all, because I was abroad, even though I was surrounded by nice people, but still you're not home. You're just in a place for a couple of months, so you can't, say, oh, at the end of the day I go home. It's not actually home. It's just a place where you're sleeping. The samples I've been working for 3 years were lost. My money was coming nearly to an end because 4 years of funding, and you have to explain, as you know, what you're doing. And so I was just seeing that I had 1 extra year and that was it. And then one of the articles got rejected. So at that point, I was let's put it in a nice way. It wasn't a brilliant week. I was really, really down. I have to say that my supervisor and co-supervisor and collaborators, they were all amazing people. And I think that's also some of the take-home messages I'll tell you in a minute. It's just surround yourself with people that support you in the good moments and in the bad moments. And everybody was extremely supportive. So they helped me to write a proposal to get more meteorite sample. We got it really fast. And so the solution was either to give up or to fight. And in this case, I went back to the Netherlands, and the extraction of the samples that took me 3 years, I managed to do in a few months. And so optimizing everything that was already optimized, go back, fly a second time to the States, and this time we actually got results. The other article that was rejected, obviously we worked again really hard, and later people told me it has nothing to do with the article, it has to do also with competition and everything, just rewrite a few things. We know how science works. At the end of the day, at the end of the 4 years, and that's, you know, moving a little bit forward, I managed to get the paper, the first one that was rejected, published. We managed to get the paper that took us so many years to optimize methods also published, and it was all over the news, on the media. So really great, lots of citations, so really good. I managed also to get the job I wanted at university I wanted. So I got not a permanent position yet, but I got a postdoc offer to go and to work at Imperial College. So at that time was on the top 5 universities on the world, working in for a space mission. So at that time, I went and I worked for the ExoMars mission. I don't work for that mission anymore, but I was working for that space mission at that point. And so at the end of the day, I got out with not only the 4 articles I needed to defend my PhD thesis, but roughly 10 articles. So things work out at the end. And I managed to finish on time, which for me was also important because the money was there just for the 4 months. And I think this was just, you know, looking back and also to all the setbacks I had during my postdoc, and I'll tell a little bit in a minute. I think there are many take-home messages here. First of all is you need to work in a group and surrounded with people that you really consider good colleagues and friends, because there's going to be always bad moments, and you need to surround yourself with people where you can discuss your results. You're not in an island, you don't feel isolated from the rest of the world. So good colleagues are important, people that can support you no matter what. So at the end of the day, if you want to go out and have a drink or a coffee with that people, it's also very important. Have a very supportive family if possible. That's also very, very important. For me, it was always, even though I was living abroad, for me, it was always very important to have an extremely supportive family that always supported me in every sense. Other lesson is don't compare yourself to other people. Because I was seeing my colleagues getting publishing all the articles all the time throughout the 3 years, and I was not publishing. This is not a race between different people. You are in your own path, and you actually don't know what other people are going through in their professional life or personal life. So it is really important that you don't compete or you're not racing with your colleagues. Again, it's being supportive. It's extremely important. And then at the end of the day, it's just thinking that you have 4 years, and even if those 4 years fail, there's always alternatives. And even that, it's just to think that for me, the first 3 years didn't work great, because even though I was working, it's the process. And knowing that in science, things don't work out next day. To get results, it takes years and years and years. It's the way that science works. I know this is very difficult to explain to the common people, or to friends that don't work in science, or even to family. And it's very difficult to explain that you're working in a project that you will only get results in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. So for example, I'm part of space missions. and I won't get any results in less than 15 years. So it is very, very weird and difficult to explain to people that I'm already working for projects that I won't know anything before that. And that's why in many cases, not my case, but in many cases, people start working a project and then they retired and they don't see the results for that space mission. So all of that. And I learned that. I learned I learned the hard way what it is to work in the space field. So not only in science, but particularly in the space field. And this brings me to the next step of my talk and my career also. So as I said, I moved to after my PhD, I went to Imperial College in London. And what happened, as I said, I was working for a space mission and for a particular instrument that was part of the ExoMars mission. And a year more or less into my postdoc, my boss called me and said, well, close the door. We need to talk. Just to let you know that the instrument we are part of this space mission just got canceled. And so you have a couple of months of salary. And after that, that's it. You're done. Because I was being paid to work for that mission. So as you can imagine, again, living abroad, the salary was the only income. Obviously, you can't depend on anyone, and that was really difficult. So I had to apply for as many scholarships and fellowships in that case as possible. Think of plan B and C and D and whatever I can think. I can tell you that I applied for 5 or 6 fellowships at that point, and I got 4 of them. I got 4 different offers, so it worked out really well because I had so many articles from my PhD. But again, it's always like I compare working in science to a little bit those movies from Indiana Jones, that you always have to run because behind you there is always some dangers, and you have to run and keep on running and trying to think while you're running of plan B and C and D and F and so I think that's also important. And talking about thinking of plan B and C and D, while I was in UK, something that was very important for me, I got funded a big chunk of money, £1,000,000 from the Royal Society for 8 years. Very prestigious, very competitive. And while I was there, the Royal Society also wrote a report that clearly show that for the 100% of students that have a PhD, only 3% will get a position in academia. And from those, only 0.5% will get a position as full professor. So those numbers are scary, but they're very realistic. And when speaking with students, I always mention that report because it is important to know all your alternatives. We don't have to follow an academic career to be successful. And I've spoken with many students, and some of them actually didn't want to be in academia after the PhD. They wanted to go to industry or teaching or do something completely different. That's where their heart was. But they thought they were a failure just because they're leaving academia. So that idea has to completely change. And so the report from the Royal Society, it is very, very important in that sense. And I think this sort of report also adapted to the Portuguese reality, which maybe I believe it's not that different than from the British reality. We should be aware very young that if you want to follow an academic career, you should know the paths towards getting a permanent academic position, either in Portugal or somewhere else. But at the same point, it is important to know that if you're not feeling happy, that's the key word, if you're not feeling happy, if that's not where your heart is, and during your PhD you realize that, then there are other alternatives. They're all valid. And so you should start searching and talking with somebody, a mentor or somebody senior that can help you. Again, going back to the Royal Society, I think it's an amazing example, an institution. And even though I left UK, I still collaborate with them and I'm in touch with them. And I can tell you they have this mentor scheme. So I'm now mentoring some very younger people that got fellowships, and so tell them all the alternatives. It's not for me to tell them to do A, B, or C, but it's to show them the alternatives. And I think that's important. Either you stay in academia or in other paths, it is important to talk. And because we are in this forum because of mental health, it is important to know that A, it's normal to fail, and B, talking is important, and telling other people what are the alternatives. Just because it worked for you, it doesn't have to work for the other person, but it's important to talk and to show the different alternatives. And I think that's it. I think I'll open for questions. I was just seeing some popping up from the chat. And so thank you for your time, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay. Thank you, Zita. Thank you very much for such a nice story. I think we can. I can relate with some of your experiences, and I guess some colleagues here will also relate to this story. So I guess we'll have plenty of questions. So we'll start with the first one from Luis. You spoke a bit about having a network of colleagues with which you can discuss your work, and also going beyond work with which you can discuss something that's not going right with you. So which is asking, what if you don't have colleagues, or what if you don't have such a network? How do you go about looking for such network?
There are different ways. You don't have to talk with the colleagues from your lab if you think it's not the best environment, or that's reality. Sometimes you fit into a group that is not the best, so it happens. Try to see if you have other colleagues in the same building or in the same institution. If not, try to talk with your friends outside of work. I know that sometimes you don't have friends that are scientists, but you still may talk about your work, not going into details and technical terms, but in general, you will see that what happens not only in science, but in different professions, you will see that it's very similar. The problems are very common, with tiny differences, because obviously science is very specific and we have specific ways of getting funding. We have specific ways of the deadlines and the way of writing proposals. But at the same time, on the general, what you're thinking and feeling, and if you have, for example, a PhD supervisor or a boss that you can't relate, that may also be happening to some of your friends outside of the work. And if you say, no, that doesn't work for me at all, well, try to find a little bit. I can tell you my experience. When I was in the Netherlands, the experience was completely different for many reasons while I was in the UK. In the Netherlands, I had a group of friends. Some of them were also colleagues from Technico. So as I said, I did chemistry, but I was having the mathematics classes with colleagues from aerospace engineers when I was 18, 19, and until 20 years old. And then we went separate ways. And funnily enough, we all met in Leiden because my colleagues were at European Space Agency. So someday I met him in the street. I'm like, okay, what are you doing here? So they were the friends I also had there in the Netherlands. So even though they were not at university, I had a massive group of friends, Portuguese friends and also other nationalities, but mainly Portuguese friends in the Netherlands. And for me, it was very important for my mental health, because at the time we didn't talk about mental health, but it was very, very important. I had an amazing group of friends. Some of them are still my friends up to today, so more than 20 years. And we always had parties and going out to drink a coffee, or just staying at home and cooking and talking about life in general and our problems and how was work going and everything. Again, because they didn't work at university, I didn't work at the European Space Agency specifically, but the problems were common. That happened in the Netherlands. In London was different. London is a much bigger city, so I couldn't just simply walk. So I had different friends from different nationalities. I can tell you that's very typical of London. I also started practicing martial arts. For me, it was very, very important for my body and also mentally and emotionally to stay calm and relax and everything. So I practiced Aikido for several years. And so also that group of people, none of them were scientists, and yet they were like a family. They were what we call the Aikido family, and actually, for me, it was very important to go out several times a week and a month to have a coffee and talking about our problems. And again, people had nothing to do with science, and they listened to me, and I listened to them. And after you start talking, you realize that sometimes you just want to listen and to be heard, and the problems are common. So that's something that I learned. And it's also it doesn't matter what's your nationality. Again, I have friends from so many different nationalities, and we still in touch, and we still call each other to check how they're doing, and they're really far away. Some are still in London, some moved away and they're in other countries, and we're still in touch, and we still ask how the other is doing, how their families are doing. And so going back to the questions, you don't have to talk about your problems, your PhD problems with your colleagues, you don't, if you don't feel like it, but it's important to talk. So try to find a network of people that you think you feel confident and you think you are comfortable with. So that's my advice. I know it's never easy, but that's, it takes time, but it is my suggestion.
Thank you very much, and it's a very good one. I guess that also related to like this, the importance of talking. You mentioned also during your talk that also your contact with your supervisor or with your supervisors was very important at that time. So Nivea is asking a question that is related to this. So when you don't have openness with your advisor, do you think that getting a co-advisor helped? And how to approach the advisor to make this happen? And I would have also a question before this, which is just for you to elaborate a bit more on how was this connection with your supervisor important? And if and the last thing is, nowadays being a supervisor yourself, what do you do to guarantee that the lessons you learned are are brought to your students?
Yeah. So I have to say, as I said, I did my 6-month undergraduate training time in the Netherlands with Professor Pascal Heijnen-Freund. So something clicked. You either click with somebody or you don't. And for me, it was very important coming from the Portuguese system, where you could see that the professor was there, was that figure you probably wouldn't approach that much. And I arrived in the Netherlands, and my supervisor and all the teachers there were extremely relaxed. We had picnics together. We would go to their houses. We met the family. So everything extremely relaxed. We wouldn't call professor something. We just called the name. So that for me was also very refreshing, I have to say, coming from the Portuguese system. And I remember the first time I was there in the Netherlands, and I said, Professor Pascal Heijnen-Freund, and everybody started laughing like, no, we don't say professor, we just say the name and that's it. So I have to say I got lucky, and sometimes it comes down to that. So I'm still friends with my PhD supervisor to the date. I know the husband, I met the kids, and she's a lovely person, and it's one of the things I got lucky. And then my co-supervisor is also from Switzerland. I also met the family, and he's also a great guy. For me, it was important to have somebody that it was also as supervisor, a role model, a woman, a female, somebody I could identify myself. She was from Austria, but she was working abroad in the Netherlands. So for me, all this experience was somebody that I consider to be a role model. She's brilliant in everything she does, but at the same time, she was extremely affectionate to us. I can tell you that, for example, my supervisor would do field work in the middle of the desert in South America, and she would call us just to say, "Are you all okay? How is work?" And we're like, "Yeah, go back to the work, leave us alone." But it was a relationship that we could do that. So I mean, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. What I've seen during my PhD and even after that, sometimes they're people, we're dealing with human beings, we just don't click or something doesn't work after a while. It happens, it's sometimes it's nobody's fault and it's tricky. My advice is when and going back to the question, yes, I do suggest that if possible you have more than one supervisor. It helps also to get different perspectives and maybe they will complement each other. So this is something that you may talks from the start of your PhD. Towards the end, it's a little bit tricky because the supervisor did all the work. So getting somebody at the end, it might get weird. But if you're in the middle or the start, I think it's fine. It's just if possible, at each case is a case, but just go to your supervisor and say, look, there's nothing personal. I just think you are from this research area. It might be a good idea also to get somebody from a different research area, from a different background, and to discuss and see if it makes sense. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But something, as I was saying, something that I learned during my PhD in Leiden, they had an independent committee, and they would talk every year with the candidate, just with the candidate. The supervisor is not there, and they would ask about the work to make sure everything was going okay. But above all, they would ask, how is your relationship with your supervisor going? Is it okay? Is it not? If not, let's think about a mitigation action. They were not there to take you away from the supervisor if things were not working, but as independent committee, and this was a committee from the university with senior professors, they could advise some alternatives. So this is something that, applying to the Portuguese reality, you could think about if in the first few months you see that, look, it's not working really well, so maybe go and speak with somebody. Talk. That's always what I say. Talk, and make sure you don't go behind anybody's back. Just talk. Be polite, but talk and just expose and say, look, I don't think this is working either personally or even on the scientific way. Maybe you get along really well with your supervisor, but maybe scientifically it's not working. And try to find alternatives. It's never that easy, I know, but it's trying to talk with as many people. Sometimes maybe the president of the department or the president of the research center will help and think about some alternatives. Sometimes even somebody from outside the university may help you and give you some tips. So sometimes maybe you stay with your supervisor, but maybe you have a non-official supervisor outside that you know give you some tips or whatever. So each case is a case, and I think the important thing is to talk and to actually expose and say something. Look, this is not working either on the scientific or on the personal level, and discuss things politely, and sit and talk. So I think that's it. And trying just to answer, I mean, trying to apply this to now, it's always difficult, but again, when I hire somebody to my group, I try that they are as diverse as possible. Try to meet with them regularly by email, personally, by Zoom, by meeting in my office. We have this tradition in our group to go out and have lunch and go to the Eclair shop because it's close to Technica and we really enjoy. Obviously now with COVID, we had to stop that tradition, but it is promised, and we always try to go to the Eclair because we really enjoy and have some activities together. I think it's also important that you need to relax at work sometimes and make sure your personal life is also okay. So that's something I always tell also my students. They don't have to tell me their personal life, but if they think they need to chat about something, I'm here for them and I can talk with them personally and privately, and we try to find a solution because your personal life also has an influence on your career and your work. So if something is not going okay, we should talk again. It all comes down to talk. So that's what I do with my group.
That's great. That showing that you're open to talk about those subjects is really great. I guess like what you were just describing answers these questions that Edgar was asking. So how to increase communication within the research group, and then you also spoke a bit about how that changed with the pandemic. Yeah. So I'll move on with another question. But Edgar, if you feel like your question was not answered, just write something on the chat. So I wanted to ask you about those specific moments in which there is a setback, right? So you spoke about this awful week in which you got the paper rejected, the samples were lost. So I'm just wondering, like, what happens on how do you deal, or how did you deal at that time with those setbacks? Like, is it just fighting back and thinking that things will come out right at the end? How do you face these moments?
You cry, first of all. I did cry. I have to say I did cry. It's not funny. I mean, I'm laughing now because things work out, but I cry. I mean, I think it's human, and I think it's one of the things we should normalize, and we're dealing with our emotions. I mean, it's your personal life also that you give up so much, because we know while we're doing a PhD, we give up on so many things. And in particular, if you're living abroad like I was, you give up on so many things at so many levels. You go to a new country, you have to start again building your network of friends and everything. So yeah, you cry, and then you have two options. You either give up or you fight. And I've been always very resilient and a fighter. And so I decided, okay, I've been working hard until now. I'm not giving up, and I'm going to fight back, and I'm going to do my best. And so that's what I did. And then you need mechanisms to cope with that, obviously, because you can't just simply, you cry one day and then go back to fighting. It doesn't work like that. And so I think you need to do, as I said, this talking, having a network of people that you consider family. If you have a supporting family, fine. I do. I'm very grateful for that. But if you don't have a family that supports you, then trying to find a group of people that you call friends and you may consider your family. So every time I've lived in so many different countries abroad, that every place I went, I needed to find a group of friends. Because life is not just about work, there are other things. And so I always try to get a network of people that I consider my friends. And so basically what I did was to do that, to have that network of people. So that's in one sense. And because I noticed that when I'm happy, even if things are, crashing down in my life, but if I'm with friends and if I have time to not think about work and I have time to breathe, then I'm more creative. And in science, creativity is also very important. And to find ways. So you have a problem in front of you, and you're thinking and you're not finding solutions for that specific problem. I find in my case that I'm more creative when I get a good night's sleep, and sometimes even having a nap, I have to say. And that was something that, for example, in the Netherlands, you could see after lunch, lots of people would close the door, and for 20 minutes or whatever, they were just relaxing. Here, it seems that people are very ashamed to say that, so it's fine. I'm not ashamed to say that. Good night sleep and sometimes a nap, it's brilliant and gets you really creative. Being surrounded by family and good friends, it's also good. And having time to relax. And then doing sports. For me, it was very important. So I did classical ballets for many years, since I was 4 years old, for 10 years. So I'm very disciplined. I have a lot of discipline. So for me, that was also important. Then during my PhD, I did yoga also to relax. And as I said, I did martial arts. So all of that is good to learn to get the stress out of your body, because health is the most important thing, and to balance all the stress with my emotions and everything. So all this, and again, my experience in the Netherlands was extremely important. They have, and I think it's kind of unique. I don't see that in lots of the countries where I live. They in the Netherlands, they work 8 hours per day, they sleep 8 hours more or less, and they have 8 hours just to relax and enjoy the family or whatever. um, and on those 8 hours that they work, they are extremely productive. So it's not the question of the 8 hours, but it's a question of being productive. And I think this is a really important point for the Portuguese reality, because we see people working until very late hours. And we are confusing here in Portugal working many hours with productivity. And sometimes people are not productive, but they work many hours. And that has an effect on family time and everything. And it's a vicious circle, that you have less and less time for your family and to take care of your health, but at the same time you don't get enough sleep, and at the same time your work is not getting done properly. So it's this vicious circle. And so something I learned in the Netherlands is, obviously sometimes in our work, especially in science, I can't just work 8 hours, but it's this balancing. And so it's trying to apply, as I said, it's never easy, but it's all those take-home messages I just told you that I try to apply in my life. And I'm seeing a question here on the chat.
Exactly. I'll just read it. I'll just read it so that the people that are watching elsewhere have a chance to understand the question. So, Luis is asking if you were able to have 8 productive hours during, or are you able to get 8 productive hours during your work and during your PhD?
Two completely different things. So during my PhD, yes, I was actually able to start work not very early, because my group, nobody started very early, I have to say. Mm-hmm. And people would accept, we wouldn't get to work before 9:30-ish, and it was fine. And nobody was there to control you, it was fine. We would have 30 minutes for lunch. And so for the rest, we would work 8 hours. I can tell you during my PhD, because when I was working, I was actually working and everybody did that. And then towards the end of the day, everybody would go out for dinner or whatever and get together over the weekend. Towards the end of my PhD, no, I would work more hours, I have to say, because I was finishing writing. And the good thing is that lots of my colleagues were also finishing writing, and we worked together in the office. And somebody would say, look, I'm going to grab my bike, I'm going to buy some dinner, and then back here. And they would buy dinner for everybody. So we would be kind of socializing, but at the same time working. So towards the end of my PhD, no, I have to be honest, I would work more than 8 hours, and I would have weird schedule towards the time I was writing my thesis. So I don't advise that to anybody. During now, I have to say that I work more than 8 hours. Shame on me, but it's also because I have many things going on at the moment. Because I'm working at Technico, and at the same time, I'm the science advisor for the president of Portugal. So I have 2 jobs at the moment, let's put it like this. And so I work more than 8 hours, but I try to be, to get enough hours sleep. That for me is extremely important. As I said, getting the number of hours, it's very important. And so the time that is left, sometimes I have less time for my personal life or for social activities, but it's a period of time when you have deadlines. And so then I try to go back to normal life after a few weeks or whatever after the deadline. But currently I'm working more than 8 hours a day. I have to be honest with that, but definitely I'm getting enough sleep. That's also important.
That's that. I mean, it's so great to have someone that is really open about this, and you know, such that we all don't feel bad for going over 8 hours. It happens to me a lot as well, even though I'm probably not as productive. But okay, that's on me. I was I just wanted to take a step back. You talked about. You talked about this idea of not comparing yourself to others,
Yeah.
that you're not racing with others. But I find personally, and I guess from many colleagues, that this is something hard to manage. On one hand, you want to be, you know, focused on your work and not comparing yourself to others, but at the end you're gonna get the next job or the next opportunity because you did a better job, or because you delivered better talks, or because you had better papers, and that it's a sum of all these things. So and when you're saying you gave better talks or put out better papers, they're better compared to others. So in the end, you are comparing yourself to others. So I guess the trick is managing this over time, and, you know, being confident that at the end your work will be enough to get an alternative, like you said many times. But I wanted to get your opinion on this. Is this just over time to keep yourself sane, let's say, or is it a specific strategy like that you said from the beginning, and then at the end when you compare the papers, etc.?
Again, in my field, I don't compare to other people. I can tell you that I'm remembering going to a conference long time, you know, with COVID, we don't travel. But I remember being in and actually in San Diego a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, nearly 3 years and a half. And, you know, there were people from my age, specifically from my age. We all started more or less the same time. And we were actually checking on each other in the sense of, okay, are you getting a permanent position? Are you getting a grant? And actually, we were supporting and cheering from each other, and actually not comparing. So I can tell you that at the end of the day, all of us got permanent positions in places, in locations that we actually enjoyed. And we all collaborate with each other. We've all been writing papers with each other and writing proposals together, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be better than the other person, because again, we're applying for different locations in different countries, even that. So I was with colleagues from France, Germany, the US. I was coming back to Portugal. And again, we were not competing for the same jobs. Yes, of course, if I go to a job interview, I know my colleague, and obviously he may have more papers than I do, or he may give better talks, but then you may be better at something else. So to be honest, I never had that because, and I've been to job interviews, and it's the question of, if you just think of, oh, he's the better candidate, he's going to get the because he has more money and he's getting more articles and he's going to get the job. And the reality is that it doesn't work like that. Sometimes you have what it seems the perfect candidate, but that perfect candidate doesn't fit that department, because that's not what the department is searching at that point. And so, you know, again, you shouldn't be comparing yourself to other person. It's, what are you good at? What are you unique? And I, throughout my PhD and my research and everything, I realized that what I was doing in my research, so looking for organic molecules in meteorites and then applying that also for space missions and everything, it was something that it was unique worldwide. And I focus on that, and I focusing on optimizing my career. I wanted to be what I wanted to do. I wanted to get a permanent position, and I wanted to come back to Portugal and build an astrobiology lab. So in order to get that, you need to get steps. And the steps was to get a fellowship that would give me lots of money and stability for a while. And so I apply for that, you know, I apply for that. I was not competing with A, B, or C. I just wanted to focus on my career and then collaborate with colleagues. And I wrote so many papers with colleagues and grants and everything. And again, I don't see that. Again, my field I know is very specific, but it's so much better. I can tell you that it's so much better to not compare yourself to others and just check on each other, and then actually you become friends and the work is so much better. And I can tell you also this issue of mental health, we talk with each other a lot. I can tell you that. And checking on each other and making sure everything is well, because I can tell you this path of academic career is extremely difficult. So again, try to make friends on the way and not enemies or whatever. Life is too short for that. So make sure the person next to you is well and contributes to that, to make sure that people are well, and so it's much better, I can tell you that.
That's great. It's very interesting that you do check on each other also, on subjects outside work. Really cool. So we're getting close to the end of our session here. There's a comment by Diogo Faustino that I'd like to read, because I think it's very relevant. So he says that the productivity vicious cycle is especially important for new students. So on the first year at Técnico, it's again a competitive environment. Students tend to put a lot of pressure on themselves. And he says that it often leads to burnout situations, and some more guidance in that sense from teachers, tutors, mentors would really make the difference. So he says also that the talk was very inspiring, and I make my words as well. I guess, like I said, we're getting close to the end. I had just a question that I left to the end, because I don't think is as relevant as all the others, but that I'm very curious to know. So you said that on the first time you sent the samples to Goddard, that they were lost. And I keep thinking, what did you do with the second time? Did you send them by mail as well? Or did you take them?
No,
You did?
we did.
Okay.
We did. I did, because I didn't want to fly to the States with white powder. Because the thing is, the meteorites are dark, but then after you extract them, the powder that is left is white. And flying with an epi with white powder on an American airport is never a clever idea. I wouldn't explain, oh, look, it's a meteorite residue. No, I mean, it wouldn't work. So no, the difference was that we checked, in the sense that the first time the package arrived, and I was like, yeah, okay, it's with the secretary and I'm not gonna bother. It's there when I need it, I'm gonna pick up. And this time we chased the sample and made sure that, okay, it's there, and so I'm gonna grab it immediately. So you know, we have mechanisms, but I don't fly usually with samples, because it's very bizarre to explain. I mean, I already flown with actual big meteorite samples from the Natural History Museum and from London, and I had the ladder, and because they're all with iron and nickel, and one of them was really a big metal iron one, I went through security, and I know it's going to be big time, because it looks like a bomb or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
and I immediately saw the panic in their face, and I was giggling, and they're like, please come here. And I'm like, yeah, I have a letter from the Natural History Museum, so it's fine. And then they all got together, the security. This was actually in Lisbon airport. They like get together, and they were asking me questions. So at the end of the day, it was very funny, because they were, asking me questions and everything, and it was all fine. But that was a very specific situation where you could actually see the meteorites, and you could see that, yes, I'm traveling with meteorites, with rock samples, so it's fine. But an epi with the white powder, there's no way you can prove that it's just a residue, and people would think white powder now. So there are alternatives, and that's why there are companies that take your samples there, and so there you go.
Yeah.
And it's always, you have a nice story to tell at the end of the day. Now I can laugh about it, so you can tell your story that the samples were lost. So there you go.
Exactly. Very, very, very cool, and very, very interesting. So thank you once again for accepting our invitation, and for such an inspiring talk. And thank you everyone that joined us here for this session as well. Really interesting. Before we go, we have the usual announcements. So let me just put up here our banner for the next events, which I guess you are seeing right now. So this banner here is just announcing the next brainstorms. which is coming up on the 31st of May. This will be a brainstorms in collaboration with the group of students in environmental engineering from IST and from the EcoPsy group. And this will be about mental health issues and in particular anxiety triggered by this feeling of lack of resources and climate change. So this will be on May 31st. And then we have on June 10th, also at 5 p.m., we'll have as guests Delsu Batista and also the group Queer IST. And we will discuss how identity issues sometimes triggered by or imposed, sorry, by society can impact mental health. These sessions will both be in Portuguese, so that's why these banners are also in Portuguese. As always, we finish by inviting you to follow us, the Club for Mental Health and Inclusion, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, our social networks. And on YouTube in particular, you can watch all the previous brainstorms if you're interested. So that would be all from our side. Again, thank you very much, everyone who joined the call, and Zita for sharing her story. It was really cool. And I see everyone soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.